Welcome back to the channel where I provide regular cricket content on interesting topics. Today's video is part 2 of a two-part series where I am running down what I believe to be the best battles in Test cricket history. As I mentioned in the first video, I think cricket, despite its gentlemanly appearance, is home for some of the most intense battles in sport. It is obviously a team game, but it is the 1v1 aspect of bowler and batsman confrontations which can make for spectacular viewing. Without further delay, let's get back on with the list. Number 5, Lillee vs Javed Miandad, Perth, 1980. When Pakistan toured Australia in 1980, there was a lot of pressure on Javed's shoulders. He was after all their leading batsman and also the captain of what was believed to be a disjointed side. The tourists, however, started the first test match brightly, restricting the Australians to just 180 in the first innings. Any enthusiasm was soon drained from the Pakistani side's faces, however, when Lillee and Terry Alderman rolled them for just 62. Their predicament was compounded by Australia setting him a nominal target of just under 550 to win. When Miandad walked out to the crease, you can forgive him for feeling the pressure. His side were 27 for 2, trying to hold on for the draw. Never shy of words, Lillee immediately started to verbally let Miandad know how on top the Australians were. He kept nibbling away at the Pakistani skipper whilst also subjecting him to an excellent spell of fast bowling. Miandad, a feisty competitor in his own rights, wasn't backing down, however, and started to snap back at Lillee with some firm words of his own. The two chipping away at each other was like a kettle about to boil, and 40 minutes before tea, with a nice partnership building, the situation boiled over. Miandad turned a Lillee delivery behind square for a single. He made his way to the non-striker's end where Lillee was standing. Miandad went to walk around the Aussie, but Lillee purposely stepped in front of him. Miandad quite rightly gave him a shove forward. Many would assume this would be the end of the matter, but Lillee decided to swing a kick at the Pakistani legend. This lit a fuse and Miandad wielded his bat above his head, getting ready to hit Lillee. Thankfully the umpire intervened, but the confrontation made headlines across the world. Miandad would battle to 79 before eventually losing his wicket, with the Aussies going on to complete a routine win. It is tough to say who won this battle, but in the court of public opinion the world sided with Miandad, so I am giving it to him. Number 4, Ambrose vs Steve Waugh, Trinidad, 1995. When the third test rolled around in what turned out to be a famous series, the Australians found themselves 1-0 up. But the West Indies of that era still had many fine players and they were not going to roll over for anyone. Batting first, the Aussies were almost immediately in trouble with Slater, Taylor and Mark Waugh back in the dressing room with only 14 runs on the board. Ambrose was on fire. When Steve Waugh walked out to the crease, he knew he would be facing a barrage, and that is exactly what he received. First ball was a snorting bouncer from Ambrose, with the customary glare to follow. It didn't get any easier, with Ambrose beating the bat on multiple occasions. Waugh was up for the fight, however, at one point telling Ambrose to just fucking bowl when he was being stared down. At one stage, Ambrose had to be physically held back by his skipper Richie Richardson. The words continued, with Waugh apparently becoming increasingly abusive in response. Tony Cozier summed up what was playing out perfectly in the commentary booth by saying, "Waugh v Ambrose, Foreman v Tyson." Waugh later admitted to being scared during this confrontation and that his countering abuse was to just mask this fear. It certainly lit a fuse under Ambrose, however. He later admitted in an interview that he had threatened to knock Waugh out and he didn't care if it meant his cricket career was over. Although he went through a difficult time at the crease, Waugh gutted his way through to 63 not out. West Indies would win the game, but the Aussies came back in the final test thanks to an epic Waugh double century, so I am going to award the victory to him. Number 3, Jofra Archer vs Steve Smith, 2019. Archer was known to many around the world from his performances in the IPL prior to his debut for England. But following his excellent performance in the World Cup, we were all very excited to see him go head-to-head against the old enemy in the Ashes. Therefore, when he made his debut in whites in the second test match at Lord's, we were on the edge of our seats. After all, we were desperate to have some sort of an answer for Steve Smith. The annoying Aussie had single-handedly won the first test for the visitors with 2 scores of 140+. Well, the main event of Archer vs Smith delivered. Coming in at 60 for 2, the game was evenly poised, but unfortunately for the English, Smith seemed to be picking up from where he left off at Lord's. Unfazed by Archer and the crowd willing on the home side, he trotted along to 70 not out before Archer started to crank up the pace. He got into a rhythm that he had not displayed as yet and immediately struck Smith on the forearm. Sorry Aussies, but after seeing what he had done in the first test I was hoping he was injured, but the skipper batted on. What followed was some of the most brutal fast bowling I have ever seen, with Archer repeatedly pinning Smith until one blow laid him out. After the Phil Hughes incident it was scary to see Smith in such bad shape, and rivalry aside all Englishmen were happy to see him back to his feet. He would go off hurt only to return bravely later in the innings but was still concussed. He would have a few swipes but got out soon after returning to the field. Who won this battle? Hard to say really. I mean, Archer did prevent him from playing the rest of this match and the following. But as Smith has reminded the press repeatedly, Archer never dismissed him in the series, so he most definitely won the war. Number 2, Dale Steyn vs Sachin Tendulkar, Cape Town, 2011. The reason I have picked this battle is due to the fact it was two all-time greats, going head-to-head while they were in form. To appreciate Sachin Tendulkar's effort it is important to note how well Steyn bowled this day. He bowled 66 balls from the top drawer in 2 spells, which went for 13 streaky runs and took 2 wickets, but that doesn't do it justice. He was beating the bat for a past time and also roughing up the batsman with short balls. Over the course of those spells Sachin opted to just try to survive against Steyn, with some masterful defending and some luck. He was just about keeping India in the game. There was no counter-attack from Sachin, it was concentration personified. It was good old-fashioned buckling down, doing his best and hoping that the good deliveries were too good for the edge. Such was Sachin's responsibility that he deliberately took 5 Steyn overs back-to-back. What he did was wear Steyn down and allowed the ball to soften. As it did so he slowly moved it up a gear or two. The extravagant shots started to flow and he rattled along to an excellent 100. Steyn was a defeated man, stating later in an interview that he felt it was almost not worth straining to bowl at Sachin that day. He instead saved his energy for the other batsmen, such was his respect for the little master. Steyn ended up with 5 wickets, a testament to how well he bowled. But in terms of a 1v1 battle, it was Sachin's superb 146 that won this one. Number 1, Alan Donald vs Michael Atherton, 1998, Trent Bridge. I do try and not to be too predictable on this channel, but this passage of play is some of the most intense viewing you could ever see. Atherton was one of those players who was half decent in an otherwise poor English side. This meant that a lot of responsibility lay on his shoulders to set the tone for the side. Unfortunately, however, he ended up in these often one-sided rivalries, with Glenn McGrath being the prime example. Famously, however, he had once held off Donald for a day and a half to save a test match in Johannesburg, so he had grit. This game was well set with England chasing 247 to level the series. England had started quite well, sitting at 76 for 1 when Donald decided to crank up the intensity. The South African bowled a snorting bouncer which Atherton struggled to get out the way of. In fact, famously the ball caught his glove on the way through. A ferocious appeal was made but the umpire stood still, so did the England captain. Atherton considered walking, but given the finely poised nature of the game it is understandable that he didn't. A rightfully annoyed Donald then proceeded to send down one of the most fiery fast bowling spells you could ever see. He again caught the edge, but this time it was dropped. Atherton rode his luck further, playing and missing and edging boundaries. At one point Donald let out a roar in frustration. Atherton just stood and stared. The day turned out to be Atherton's, with him finishing on 98 not out as England completed the chase. Although enemies that day, the two would later forge a close friendship which remains strong 25 years later. That wraps up my top 10 battles in cricket history, and as ever I am sure there are some that I have missed out. Go crazy in the comments with some of the battles which you can remember in Test cricket. I am sure there are some good ones I've forgotten. As ever, thanks to you all for watching and participating.